The envelope trembles in my gloved hands. Postmark, November 1974. My name, my address. But the sender's name makes my knees buckle. James Hartley. My biological father, who died in Vietnam before I was born. That was 20 minutes ago. Now I'm sitting in my car outside the post office, staring at this impossible letter while rain hammers the windshield. The postal clerk had shrugged when I asked how a letter could take 50 years to arrive. Sometimes they get stuck in the sorting equipment, she'd said. Found a whole bag from the 60s last month during renovations. My name is Catherine Ross, and I thought I knew my history. 61 years old, retired high school principal, widowed 3 years, 2 adult sons who call when they need money. I was raised by my mother Helen and my stepfather Frank in a small brick house in Columbus, Ohio. The story I'd been told since childhood was clean and simple. James Hartley, my biological father, died in a helicopter crash in 1973, 2 months before I was born. Mom met Frank at church in 1975, married him in 1976, and he adopted me officially in 1977. End of story. Except now I'm holding a letter from a dead man, dated 7 months after he supposedly died. The envelope is yellowed, but intact, one corner torn where it must have caught on something during its 5-decade journey through postal purgatory. The address is written in blue ballpoint pen, the cursive careful and deliberate. What strikes me most is that he knew where we lived. The house on Maple Avenue? We didn't move there until 1974, after his death. I open it in my car, using my keys to slice through the aged adhesive. Inside is a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. Catherine, I know your mother told you I died. By the time you read this, it might even be true. But as I write this on November 15, 1974, I am very much alive, hiding in a motel room in Cleveland, watching the door and wondering if they've found me yet. I need you to know the truth, even if you're too young to understand it now. The key enclosed opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Columbus, Box 472. I've left everything I could save for you there. Documents, photos, and proof of what really happened. Your mother isn't who you think she is. Neither is Frank. They made a deal before you were born, and I was the payment. I tried to come back for you. The courts, the police, even the army, they all said I was dead. Paper trails are easy to fake when someone has the right connections. If you're reading this, you're probably an adult now, old enough to handle the truth. Look for the marriage certificate, the real one. I love you, though we've never met. James Alexander Hartley, Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army. Serial number 548462319. The key is small, tarnished, with FNB 472 etched on one side. First National Bank of Columbus was bought out by Chase in 1998. Would a safety deposit box from 1974 even still exist? I read the letter 3 more times, each reading making less sense than the last. My mother had shown me my father's death certificate when I was 16, after I'd asked too many questions about him. Department of Defense letterhead, official seals, killed in action, body not recovered. She'd cried showing it to me, and I'd felt guilty for making her relive the loss. Frank had been a good stepfather. Quiet, steady, worked at the telephone company for 37 years. Paid for my college, walked me down the aisle at my wedding, taught my boys to fish. When Mom died of a stroke in 2018, he'd grieved like any devoted husband would. He lived another 2 years before cancer took him. A normal life, a normal family, normal deaths. Nothing about this letter was normal. I drove home and did what any rational person would do. I Googled James Alexander Hartley, serial number 54-846-2319. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial website had no record of him. The Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency listed no one by that name as missing or killed in action. But when I searched the serial number alone, I found a single hit on a genealogy forum from 2008. Looking for information about SFC James Hartley, 54-846-2319, stationed at Fort Benning 1972-1973. He was my uncle. Family lost touch after he came back from Vietnam. Please contact if you have any information. The post was signed Mitchell Hartley with an email address. I stared at that word. Came back. I composed and deleted 17 different emails before finally sending, I may have information about James Hartley. Please call me. I included my phone number. Mitchell called within an hour. His voice was gravelly, uncertain. You knew Uncle Jimmy? He was my father. I was told he died in 1973. A long pause. Ma'am, Jimmy didn't die until 1987. Car accident in West Virginia. I was at his funeral. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my kitchen table. That's impossible. I have his death certificate from Vietnam. I don't know what you have, but Jimmy came home from Vietnam in December 1972. Spent Christmas with us in Pittsburgh. Then something happened. He wouldn't say what, and he disappeared for a while. Showed up again in 75. Different name. Working construction. Kept moving around. Paranoid about something. We thought it was PTSD. Did he ever mention a daughter? Or a woman named Helen? Never mentioned any family. Said he couldn't have kids after the war. Always assumed he meant medically, from injuries. But maybe he meant something else. We agreed to meet. Mitchell lived 3 hours away in Pittsburgh, but he offered to drive to Columbus the next day. He wanted to bring photos, documents, anything that might prove his uncle and my father were the same person, or different people. I wasn't sure which possibility was worse. That night, I went through my mother's things again. I'd kept 2 boxes of documents after settling her estate birth certificates, marriage licenses, tax returns. Everything looked legitimate. Her marriage certificate to Frank was dated June 1976. My adoption papers, December 1977. My birth certificate listing James Hartley as father, Helen Morrison as mother. Death certificate for James Hartley, dated March the 17th, 1973. But then I found something I'd overlooked before. A receipt tucked inside an old Christmas card. From a lawyer's office, dated October 1974. $5,000 paid to Morrison, Klein & Associates. For what? The memo line just said, services rendered. Morrison, my mother's maiden name. I called the law firm the next morning. They dissolved in 2001, but the Ohio State Bar Association had records. Richard Morrison, senior partner, had been my mother's second cousin. He'd been disbarred in 1989 for fraud. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. Mitchell Hartley arrived at noon, carrying a cardboard box like it contained explosives. He was 73, tall and thin, with the same sharp nose I saw in my mirror every morning. When he saw me, he stopped walking. Jesus, you look just like him. We sat in my living room, the box between us on the coffee table. He pulled out a photograph first. A young man in army dress uniform, serious expression, dark eyes, my chin. Even the way his left eyebrow arched slightly higher than the right. That's Jimmy in 1972, right before Vietnam. I showed him the only photo I had of my father, given to me by my mother when I turned 18. Same uniform, similar pose, but the face was different. Close enough to be a brother maybe, but not the same man. That's not Jimmy, Mitchell said flatly. I don't know who that is, but it's not my uncle. Mitchell spread more documents across my coffee table. Discharge papers showing James Hartley honorably discharged in December 1972. Pay stubs from a construction company in West Virginia from 1976 to 1987. A driver's license from 1985 with a different name, James Mitchell, but the same face from the uniform photo. The obituary from the Charleston Gazette, dated June 15, 1987, describing a single car accident on Route 19. He was running from something his whole life, Mitchell said. Grandma always said it was a woman who ruined him, but she never knew details. I pulled out the letter that had arrived yesterday, handed it to him. His hands shook as he read it. Cleveland, he muttered. He disappeared for 6 months in '74. Wouldn't tell anyone where he'd been. The key, I said. He mentions a safety deposit box. First National went under decades ago. But safety deposit boxes don't just disappear. They get transferred to whatever bank buys the assets. It took 4 hours of phone calls to trace the path. First National to Bank Ohio. Bank Ohio to National City. National City to PNC. Each merger meant records got archived, digitized, or lost. Finally, a supervisor at PNC's regional office confirmed that unclaimed boxes from First National had been moved to their main branch in downtown Columbus. But you'd need a court order to access it, she said, and proof of inheritance. I have the key, and I'm his daughter. Do you have a death certificate? I almost laughed. I had 2 death certificates for the same man, dated 14 years apart, and neither might be real. The next morning, I hired a lawyer. Patricia Vance specialized in estate law and had the kind of calm efficiency that made you believe problems could be solved with enough paperwork. She reviewed everything I had, making notes on a yellow legal pad. The death certificate from 1973 is fake, she said simply. Good fake, but fake. The seal is wrong. They changed it in 1971, and this shows the old version. Someone with access to military forms but not current ones. My mother's cousin was a lawyer. That would do it. The question is why, and who was in on it? The letter says my mother and Frank made a deal. Patricia studied the letter again. When exactly did Frank come into the picture? Mom said they met at church in 1975. But you need to verify that. If Frank knew your father was alive, if he participated in faking his death, this could be fraud. Insurance fraud, if your mother collected death benefits. Identity theft. Conspiracy. They're both dead. What does it matter now? It matters if there's money involved. Or property. Did Frank have life insurance? Did your mother? Who inherited? Frank's life insurance had gone to my mother. When she died, her estate, including the insurance payout, had been split between me and my younger brother David, Frank and Mom's biological son, born in 1977. We need to get into that safety deposit box, Patricia said. I'll file an emergency petition with probate court. Given the circumstances, we might get a hearing this week. While Patricia worked on the legal side, I worked on the family history. I called David, trying to figure out how to explain this without sounding insane. Someone's been sending you old letters? He asked. Like a prank? Not someone. The letter is real. It got lost in the postal system. For 50 years? It happens. Remember that story about the wedding invitation delivered 30 years late? But you're saying Dad wasn't really your dad? That your biological father faked his death? I'm saying something happened in 1974 that Mom and Frank never told us about. David was quiet for a long moment. Frank had nightmares sometimes, about someone coming back. Mom always said it was from his time in Korea, but he was a clerk. Never saw combat. When did the nightmares start? I don't know. Always, as far as I can remember. But they got worse in the 80s. He'd wake up yelling about Jimmy. My blood went cold. He yelled my father's name. I thought it was just a random name. Mom never reacted to it. Of course she didn't. She knew exactly who Jimmy was and why Frank feared his return. The court hearing was set for Thursday. Patricia had worked some kind of legal magic, convincing a judge that the safety deposit box might contain evidence of identity theft and fraud. The judge ordered PNC to grant us supervised access. The bank manager met us in a small private room, carrying a metal box that looked older than I was. The key fit perfectly, turning with a grinding click that echoed off the walls. Inside were 3 manila envelopes, each labeled in the same careful handwriting from the letter. The first envelope, marriage. Inside was a marriage certificate, dated February 12, 1973. James Alexander Hartley and Helen Marie Morrison married in Columbus, Ohio, 3 weeks before he supposedly died in Vietnam. But he'd been discharged from the Army in December 1972, which meant my parents were married when he was allegedly killed in action. The second envelope, evidence, a stack of letters from my mother to someone named Robert Klein. The same law firm Morrison, Klein and Associates. But these weren't legal documents. They were love letters. Bobby, James came by again yesterday. He knows about us. We need to move faster on the plan. Frank says he can get the death certificate through his connections at the VA. Tell your cousin at the courthouse. We need the divorce papers destroyed. Dated October 1973, 7 months after my father's supposed death, while my mother was pregnant with me. The third envelope made my hands shake. Catherine. Inside were dozens of photos. My mother, young and beautiful, with a man who wasn't James Hartley. Robert Klein, according to the notation on the back. They were clearly together intimate poses, his hand on her pregnant belly. My pregnant belly. The final document was a DNA test from 1974. Primitive by today's standards, but clear enough. Blood type analysis suggesting James Hartley could not be the biological father of Helen Morrison's child. I wasn't James Hartley's daughter. I was Robert Klein's. Patricia read everything twice, her expression darkening. This is elaborate fraud. Your mother was having an affair, got pregnant, and instead of divorcing James, they faked his death. But why? Why not just divorce? Money, probably, or reputation. In 1973, in Ohio, adultery could affect alimony, custody, property division. If James was officially dead, your mother was a widow, not a divorcee who cheated. And Frank? Look at this. She pointed to one of the letters. Frank worked at the VA office. He had access to military records, forms, seals. They paid him to create the false death certificate. Mitchell had been waiting in the bank lobby. When he saw my face, he knew. We drove to a diner in silence, the box of documents between us like a confession. Jimmy wasn't your biological father, I said finally. But he loved me anyway. Enough to try to leave something for me. Mitchell stirred his coffee slowly. That explains why he never talked about family. He'd been erased. They destroyed his life to cover up an affair. What happened to the other man? Robert Klein? According to the court records Patricia pulled that afternoon, Robert Klein had died in a boating accident in August 1974. 3 months before James wrote the letter. The death had been ruled accidental, but the timing seemed convenient. With Robert dead, and James officially dead, my mother was free to reinvent history. But James knew, Patricia said, reading through more documents. He tried to reclaim his identity. Look, court petitions from 1974, trying to prove he was alive. All denied because he couldn't prove he was James Hartley when James Hartley was officially dead. Catch-22. Exactly. Your mother's cousin, the lawyer, made sure of that. Every time James tried to surface, they'd file injunctions, claim identity theft, fraud. He couldn't get a job under his real name, couldn't access his veterans' benefits, couldn't fight for custody. So he ran, and kept running until he died. That night, I confronted the one person still alive who might have known, my Aunt Sharon, my mother's sister. She was 83, living in assisted care, but sharp as ever. I wondered when you'd find out, she said simply. You knew? Helen told me everything in 1990. She was drunk at Christmas, crying about Bobby. That's what she called Robert Klein. The love of her life, she said. And James? A mistake. She married him on a whim before he shipped out for his second tour. When he came back, early discharged for medical reasons, something about his nerves. She was already with Bobby, already pregnant. So they destroyed him. Sharon's face hardened. He wasn't stable, Catherine. The war broke something in him. Helen said he'd have episodes, paranoia, accusations. When he found out about the pregnancy, he threatened to kill Bobby. Maybe because they were stealing his life. Maybe. But Helen was scared. Frank, he was Bobby's friend, offered to help. For a price. What price? Marriage. Frank had always loved Helen. He said he'd create the paperwork, make James legally dead, but only if Helen married him after a decent interval. And she agreed? Bobby was supposed to divorce his wife and marry Helen. But then the boating accident happened, and Helen was stuck. Widowed from a man who wasn't dead, pregnant by a dead man who wasn't her husband, and contractually obligated to marry Frank. The cruelty of it took my breath away. 3 lives 4, counting mine twisted into lies that lasted decades. David called that night, hysterical. I found Dad's journal. Mom made me executor, remember? I was going through the safety deposit box at their bank, looking for bonds, and there was this notebook. What does it say? Everything. How they did it. How much they paid people. How they tracked James for years, making sure he couldn't come back. Dad hired private investigators, had James fired from jobs, called in false police reports. They tortured him. Send me photos of the pages. The journal was meticulous. Frank had documented every payment, every forged document, every time James tried to reclaim his life. Entries like, March 1975, Jay showed up at Helen's work, called police, claimed stalking. Jay arrested, held 72 hours. June 1976, Jay got job at Chrysler plant using fake name. Tipped off HR about false identity. Fired. October 1978, Jay tried to contact Catherine through social worker. Had lawyer send cease and desist. December 1981, Jay, living in Charleston, seems stable. Continue monitoring. The last entry was from 1987, a week before James died. Jay, hired lawyer in WV. Asking questions about death certificate again. May need permanent solution. They killed him, David said. That car accident wasn't an accident. We can't prove that. Dad documented everything else. Why stop there? Patricia reviewed the journal the next morning. This is conspiracy, fraud, stalking, possibly murder, but everyone involved is dead except who? Frank's brother, Tom Walsh. She pointed to an entry from 1974. Tom handled the VA paperwork. paid him $500. Tom Walsh was still alive, 91 years old, living in Florida. Patricia drew up a subpoena while I booked a flight. He lived in a modest condo near Tampa, surrounded by golf courses and strip malls. When he opened the door and saw my face, he aged another decade. "You look like him." "Like who?" "Jimmy Hartley." Christ, I knew this day would come. He let me in, poured himself scotch despite it being 10 in the morning, and sat heavily in a recliner. Frank swore no one would ever find out. "Tell me what happened." "Your mother was in trouble, pregnant by another man while her husband was supposed to be dead in Vietnam, except he wasn't dead. Or in Vietnam. He'd been discharged, but the paperwork was slow. She'd already started telling people he was killed in action. So Frank helped her make it official. Frank saw an opportunity. He'd loved Helen since high school, but she chose Jimmy, then Bobby, never him. This was his chance. And you helped. I created one form, one fake death certificate. Frank said Jimmy was dangerous, unstable, said it was for Helen's safety. Did you know they would spend 14 years destroying his life?" Tom's hands shook. I found out later. Frank would brag sometimes, drunk at Christmas. How they'd kept Jimmy running, scared, alone. How Helen would cry about it. But Frank would remind her what would happen if the truth came out. They'd all go to prison. James left evidence, documents proving everything. I know. Frank was terrified of that. He hired people to search for any storage units, safety deposit boxes, anywhere Jimmy might have hidden proof. Never found it. He should have looked harder. Tom gave me a signed affidavit, admitting his role in forging the death certificate. Patricia said it was enough to posthumously clear James Hartley's name, maybe even pursue a civil case against my mother's estate. But what was the point? Everyone was dead. The money was spent. The years were gone. Then David found the insurance policies. "Mom had 3 life insurance policies we didn't know about," he said. "Purchased in 1974, right after James's death. The beneficiary on all 3 was Robert Klein. But after he died, she changed them. To Frank. No, to a trust, the Morrison Family Trust, managed by her cousin at the law firm. Patricia pulled the trust documents. It was labyrinthine, designed to hide money while appearing legitimate. Over 50 years, my mother had paid premiums on policies worth $2 million total. When she died, the trust paid out to numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands. "This is money laundering," Patricia said. "The insurance policies were bought with the proceeds from defrauding James Hartley's military benefits. Your mother collected widow's benefits for 15 years before the VA caught on and closed the file. So there's $2 million sitting somewhere? More, with interest. The question is, who has access?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Robert Klein's widow called me after seeing my name in a legal filing. "I've been waiting 49 years for someone to investigate Bobby's death," she said. Margaret Klein was 77, living in a nursing home in Dayton. When I visited, she had boxes of documents waiting. "Bobby wasn't supposed to die," she said. "The plan was for him to divorce me, marry your mother, and they'd all live happily with the insurance money from James's death. But Frank got greedy. Frank killed Robert, made it look like an accident. Bobby couldn't swim, everyone knew that. Frank invited him fishing, just the 2 of them. Boat capsized in calm water. Frank swanned ashore. But why? Because with Bobby dead, Frank got Helen and the money. The trust was Frank's idea. Your mother didn't know how it really worked." She showed me letters between Robert and Frank from early 1974, discussing the trust structure. Frank had convinced Robert to put the insurance policies in a trust that Frank would secretly control. When Robert died, Frank became the sole trustee. "He's been stealing from it for 50 years, Margaret said. "I hired investigators after Bobby died, but Frank covered his tracks. The cousin at the law firm, Richard Morrison, made sure everything looked legal. Richard was disbarred in 1989 for other frauds. But by then, the trust was established, the money was hidden, and Frank had what he wanted. Patricia worked with a forensic accountant to trace the money. It took 3 weeks, but they found it. $17 million spread across various investments, all controlled by a shell company Frank had established in 1975. The company was now managed by Frank's nephew, William Walsh Tom's son. William Walsh was a hedge fund manager in Manhattan. When Patricia contacted him, he lawyered up immediately. "He knows," Patricia said. "He's been managing illegal money for decades." We filed a civil suit. David and I, as the defrauded heirs of James Hartley and the children of Helen Morrison, claimed the trust assets were the proceeds of fraud. William Walsh countered that the statute of limitations had expired. Then Mitchell found the smoking gun. "Jimmy had another safety deposit box," he said, "in West Virginia. He gave me the key in 1987, a week before he died. Said to open it only if something happened to him. I forgot about it until now." Inside that box was a tape recorder and dozens of cassettes. James had recorded phone conversations with Frank from 1975 to 1987. Frank admitting to the fraud, discussing how to keep James away from the girl me, planning ways to discredit James if he ever went public. And on the last tape, dated June 1st, 1987, Frank saying, "You come near Catherine again, and you'll have an accident just like Bobby." Patricia had the tapes authenticated. They were real, admissible, and damning. William Walsh's lawyers offered to settle. The mediation took place in a gleaming conference room in Manhattan. William sat across from us, looking nothing like the uncle I remembered from childhood. He'd visited occasionally, always bringing expensive gifts, always leaving quickly. "I didn't know the origin of the money when I took over managing it," he said. "Your father Tom says otherwise," Patricia responded. "He says Frank told you everything in 2010, before he got sick." William's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, William said, "What do you want?" "The truth," I said. "And the money that should have gone to James Hartley's daughter." "You're not his biological daughter." "No. But he didn't know that when he tried to provide for me. He loved me anyway." The settlement was $17 million, to be split between David and me. But David refused his half. "It's blood money," he said. "Dad Frank destroyed an innocent man. I don't want it." So I established the James Hartley Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans who've been denied benefits or lost their identities to bureaucratic errors. It seemed like something James would have wanted. But the story doesn't end with money or justice. 3 months after the settlement, I received another letter. This one hand-delivered by a courier, no postal delay. The return address was a law firm in Charleston, West Virginia. Inside was a single paragraph. "Ms. Ross, I represent a client who has information regarding the death of James Hartley in 1987. This information was recently discovered in documents left by my late predecessor. My client wishes to meet with you privately to discuss this matter. Time is of the essence." The lawyer, Martin Henley, refused to give details over the phone. My client is elderly and insists on meeting in person. Can you come to Charleston? I flew out the next day. The client was Louise Hartley, James's younger sister, 90 years old, in a wheelchair, but with eyes that missed nothing. I helped Jimmy fake his death, she said simply. His second death? The only death, the car accident in 1987. But Mitchell went to the funeral. Mitchell went to a funeral. Closed casket. Waited with sandbags. Jimmy was already on a Greyhound to Canada. I stared at her, speechless. He knew they were going to kill him, Louise continued. Frank had made that clear. So we staged the accident. I had a friend at the morgue who provided an unclaimed body, similar height and build. Car crashed and burned beyond recognition. Jimmy took the new identity we'd been preparing and disappeared. He's alive? Was. Died for real in 2019. COVID. But he lived 32 more years as Michael Hartman. Got married. Even had kids. They never knew his real name. She pulled out a photo album. James in his 60s, 70s, 80s. Wedding photos with a woman named Susan. Pictures with 2 sons. Grandchildren. A whole life lived after his supposed death. Why didn't he contact me? He wanted to. God, how he wanted to. But Frank was still alive, still dangerous. And by the time Frank died, you had your own life. He didn't want to disrupt it with his chaos. But he was innocent. Innocent people don't always get justice, Catherine. Sometimes they just survive. She gave me a letter James had written in 2018, the year my mother died. Catherine, by the time you read this, if you ever do, I'll be gone. Really gone this time. Louise promised to find you after enough time had passed. I watched you grow up from a distance. Sat in the back row at your high school graduation. Was across the street at your wedding. Saw you become a principal. Raise your boys. Live the life I couldn't give you. Your mother, Helen, she wasn't evil. She was young and scared and in love with the wrong man. Frank was the evil one. He took everything from me. But worse, he took me from you. I want you to know that those few months in 1973, when Helen and I were together before I deployed, were real. I loved her. And when she told me she was pregnant, even knowing the baby might not be mine, I was happy. I wanted to be your father. The DNA test Frank forced on Helen proved you weren't biologically mine. But biology isn't everything. In my heart, you were my daughter from the moment I knew you existed. That never changed, through all the years of running, hiding, watching from shadows. I'm sorry I couldn't fight harder. Sorry I couldn't be the father you deserved. But I'm not sorry I loved you. That was the one thing they couldn't take from me. Forever your father in spirit, James. Louise had one more revelation. Jimmy left you something. In his will, his real will, as Michael Hartman. The something was a small cabin in British Columbia, where James had spent his final years. Louise's lawyer had maintained it since his death, paying taxes and utilities from an account James had established. He wanted you to have a place that was really yours, Louise said, untouched by Frank's influence or Helen's lies. I flew to British Columbia the following week. The cabin was modest but perfect, overlooking a lake, surrounded by pine forests. Inside, James had left photos of me throughout my life, pictures taken from afar, newspaper clippings of my achievements, even a copy of my dissertation. He'd been watching, caring, loving from a distance that must have been agony. On the mantel was a final letter. This is your true inheritance, not money or property, but but the knowledge that you were loved by someone who asked nothing in return. Be happy here, or sell it, or never come back. It's yours to decide. Finally, something in this story that's yours alone. I kept the cabin. David and I go there sometimes, trying to understand the web of lies that created us. He's been seeing a therapist about Frank, about learning his father was a monster who happened to be kind to him. The complexity of that truth is breaking something in him that might never fully heal. William Walsh went to prison for tax evasion and money laundering. Tom Walsh died before the trial, taking his secrets with him. The James Hartley Foundation has helped dozens of veterans recover benefits and identities lost to bureaucratic nightmares. But late at night, I think about James, my father in all ways but blood living as Michael Hartman, watching me from across streets and auditoriums, loving me from an exile my mother and Frank created. I think about the 32 years he lived after his staged death, unable to claim his name or his daughter. Last month, I hired a private investigator to find Michael Hartman's widow and sons. They deserve to know who he really was, even if it shattered their understanding of their father and husband. The investigator found them in Vancouver. Susan Hartman was gracious when I called, though confused. Michael said he had no family. He had to say that? For your safety and his? I told her everything. She listened in silence, occasionally gasping, once crying. When I finished, she said, he had nightmares about a little girl, called out Catherine in his sleep. I thought it was trauma from his military service. It was trauma, just not the kind you thought. She agreed to meet. Her sons, my half-brothers, in a way, were angry at first. Their father had lied to them their entire lives. But when they saw the photos James had kept of me, the evidence of his love across decades of separation, something shifted. He talked about you without saying your name, the older son Paul said. Always abstract. I knew a girl once who loved geology. When you became a teacher, there's a principal in Ohio doing amazing things when you won that state award. We thought he was just interested in education. He was interested in me. The full truth emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in reverse, the clear picture dissolving into its component chemicals. Susan sent me James's journals from his years as Michael Hartman, 40 notebooks filled with his careful handwriting, documenting not just his daily life, but his parallel existence watching mine. May 15th, 1992. C graduated summa cum laude today. Sat in the overflow room, watching the ceremony on closed circuit. Helen was there, crying. Frank looked bored. They don't deserve her excellence. June 8th, 1998. C's wedding was beautiful. The father-daughter dance nearly broke me. Frank stepped on her dress. I wanted to cut in so badly my hands shook. Susan thinks I'm having anxiety attacks. She's not wrong. September 3rd, 2004. First grandchild born. My grandson, though he'll never know. Watched through the hospital window as C held him. The cycle continues, but cleaner now. No lies in her family. April 11, 2018. Helen died yesterday. Considered going to the funeral, but Frank is still alive. C gave a beautiful eulogy about forgiveness. I wanted to tell her there's nothing to forgive. She was a child, innocent of their sins. The journals revealed something else. James had been building a legal case for decades. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence that he couldn't use while Frank was alive. He'd even hired lawyers under his Michael Hartman identity to research statute of limitations, waiting for the day he could safely reclaim his name. But COVID took him 6 months too soon. Frank died in March 2020. James died in September 2019. He was going to contact you after Frank died, Susan told me when we met in person. Had it all planned. The lawyers, the documentation, even practiced what he'd say. But then the pandemic started, and he was immunocompromised from old injuries. The injuries were from the staged accident in 1987. Louise had underplayed how violent it had been. James had actually been in the car when it crashed, jumping out just before impact. He'd broken his leg, ribs, and suffered burns that required skin grafts. The dedication to maintaining his death was absolute. I brought the DNA test from 1974 to our meeting. Susan looked at it sadly. He knew you weren't his biological daughter from the beginning, from when I was 3 months in the womb, and he still fought for you, still loved you, still destroyed his life, trying to stay connected to you. He didn't know how not to love me, I said, finally understanding. Susan's sons Paul and Christopher had questions. Why hadn't their father fought back legally once he was Michael Hartman? Why let Frank win? The answer was in one of the later journals. Fighting would have exposed Catherine. The fraud, the lies, the blood money. It would have destroyed her career, her reputation. She was a principal, a respected educator. How could I drag her through that? Love sometimes means staying silent. Love sometimes means letting the villains win. He protected you by disappearing, Paul said. That's heroic and heartbreaking. It's both. We spent 3 days together, sharing stories. I told them about finding the letter, about the safety deposit box, about unraveling 5 decades of lies. They told me about Michael Hartman, a quiet man who worked as a carpenter, coached Little League, never missed a school play. A good father who happened to be living under a false name. He taught us that integrity matters more than winning, Christopher said. Now I understand why. He'd lost everything to people without integrity. On my last day in Vancouver, Susan gave me a wooden box James had made. Inside were 2 things: his real dog tags from Vietnam and a photo I'd never seen. It was from the day I was born. James in a hospital corridor, looking through glass at the newborn ward. Someone else had taken it, probably a nurse who took pity on a father not allowed to see his child. On the back, in James's writing, Catherine, 0 days old. My daughter, always. How did he even get into the hospital? I asked Louise later. He borrowed a janitor's uniform, mopped floors for 3 hours just to see you. The final revelation came from Margaret Klein, Robert's widow, who called me with one last piece of information. I've been thinking about Bobby's death, she said. There was a witness, a fisherman who saw 2 men in the boat before it capsized, but only saw one swim to shore. He told police, but Frank's brother Tom worked dispatch. The report was buried. The witness died in 2005, but his son has his journals. Everything his father saw is documented. The son, now 60 himself, met me in a diner in rural Ohio. His father's journal was explicit. Frank had hit Robert with an oar, then capsized the boat deliberately. He'd watched Frank swim to shore, check that Robert wasn't following, then run for help. Dad wanted to come forward, but Deputy Walsh Tom told him he'd been mistaken. Suggested bad things might happen to people who spread false accusations about grieving friends. It was murder. Documented, witnessed murder. But everyone involved was dead. and prosecutors wouldn't pursue a case where both the perpetrator and most witnesses were deceased. Patricia suggested a wrongful death civil suit against Frank's estate. But what was the point? The money was already recovered. The truth was already known. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing. I decided to let it go. Not forget, not forgive, but let it go. The cabin in British Columbia became my refuge. I spent a month there alone, reading James's journals, trying to reconcile the father I'd never known with the stranger who'd loved me from afar. David visited once, couldn't handle the weight of it, and left after 2 days. He was more of a father to you than Frank ever was to me, he said. And he never even spoke to you. Love doesn't require proximity, but it should. Mitchell died peacefully in his sleep last month. At his funeral, I met more of James's relatives' cousins who'd wondered what happened to him. An elderly aunt who cried when she saw my face. They'd all been told he died in that car accident in 1987. Finding out he'd lived another 32 years was a gift and a cruelty. I gave the eulogy at a second funeral, a memorial for James Hartley, finally under his real name. Susan and her sons came. Louise, despite her age, attended. We buried an empty coffin next to his parents' graves, finally putting his name on stone. William Walsh was released from prison last week, his sentence reduced for cooperation. He sent me a letter. I knew it was wrong, but Frank was family, and family keeps secrets. I see now that some secrets are poison. They spread through generations, corrupting everything. I'm sorry for my part in your father's suffering. I didn't respond. Some apologies come too late to matter. The James Hartley Foundation has expanded. We've helped over 100 veterans now, not just with benefits, but with identity recovery, legal assistance, fighting bureaucratic erasure. Each success feels like a small victory for James, proof that his suffering meant something. Susan and I have become friends, bound by our love for the same man under different names. She's moving to Ohio next month, closer to her sons who've relocated for work, but really to be closer to me. We're the keepers of James's memory now, the only ones who can hold both versions of him, the erased father and the false-named husband in one story. Last week, I received one final letter, not through the mail, but left on my doorstep in Columbus. No postmark, no return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a photo from 1973. James and my mother, clearly in love, standing in front of the house I grew up in. On the back, before the lies. This was real. I don't know who sent it. Maybe Louise found it in James's things. Maybe someone else from that time, carrying guilt and seeking absolution. But I kept it. Put it next to the photo of baby me in the hospital, next to the image of James as Michael with his Canadian family. The complete picture of a man who was erased, who survived erasure, who loved through erasure. My father in all ways but blood, the first casualty in my mother's war against truth, the only hero in a story full of villains and victims. I'm back in Columbus now, living my normal life. But everything feels different. Every document seems potentially false. Every old photo might hide a secret. Every elderly person might be carrying decades of buried truth. The past isn't gone, it's just hiding, waiting for a lost letter to resurface, waiting for someone to open the right safety deposit box, waiting to destroy the careful lies we've built our lives upon. The letter that started this, the one from 1974, sits framed on my mantel. Such a small thing, a few ounces of paper and ink, delayed by 50 years of mechanical failure. It destroyed everything I thought I knew about my family. It revealed crimes, and love, and sacrifice, and murder. It gave me a father I'd never known I'd lost. Sometimes mail gets delayed. Sometimes the universe holds on to secrets until exactly the right moment to reveal them. Sometimes a daughter needs to be old enough, strong enough, established enough to handle the truth about where she came from. James Hartley died 3 times, once in paperwork in 1973, once in staged flames in 1987, and finally in truth in 2019. But love doesn't die. It just gets lost sometimes, stuck in the sorting machinery of life, waiting to be delivered. The postmark was November 1974. The delivery was 2024. 50 years of delay, 50 years of lies, 50 years of love that couldn't be expressed. Sometimes the most important messages arrive exactly when they're meant to, even if that's 5 decades late. If you stayed with me through all of this, thank you. I needed to tell someone the whole truth, and you listened. That means more than you know.